is welcome to this panel, which is organized by the Atlantic Council of Montenegro and Atlas Foundation. And I'm really glad that we are able here to host two congressmen from the US and the former Minister of Defense of Albania. I have to tell you at the very beginning that we are very limited with the time. And since your next meeting is at noon, we have to stick to the time, and also I will kindly ask the audience, if there are any questions later on, to be very, very direct and very short in posing those questions and addressing to our panelists. So let's start without wasting our time, if you agree, First of all, to give a word to Congressman Robert Aderholt, who is representing Alabama's 4th Congressional District in his 10th term, if I'm right. Also, Congressman Aderholt is a member of the powerful House Committee on Appropriations, which has a jurisdiction over funding the operation of the federal government. He's also chairman of the Subcommittee on Agriculture. He supports greater transparency, accountability, and oversight to the appropriations process. Aderholt is also a member of the Commerce, Justice, and Science Subcommittee, and also of the Defense Subcommittee. So, Congressman Aderholt, welcome to Montenegro.
Thank you.
And if you agree, I will be very direct and very concrete with my first question to you. I will give you, each of you, like 5 minutes some general introductory remarks, and then we will immediately start with the Q&A also from the audience. So be ready to pose the questions whenever you want. There are a lot of speculations nowadays in respect of membership of Montenegro into NATO. Are we going to get that invitation by the end of the year or not? Everybody's talking about December, and so on and so on. My question to you is, can we count on U.S. support in that respect, in respect of getting the invitation by the end of this year? And also, will Obama's administration have enough courage to oppose a very strong influence which Russia has nowadays here in this region, and especially in Montenegro? Please.
Well, first of all, let me say it is an honor to be here back in Montenegro. This is my probably 4th visit here to Montenegro, and it's always I'm reminded of how beautiful this country is, and it's great to be here. To all the ambassadors are here, and especially to the U.S. ambassador that is here, thank you for joining us here today. It's good to meet you and have a chance to visit with you this morning. Let me just say, first of all, I've been traveling this region. I guess my first travel this region over 15 years ago, right after I was first elected to Congress. But I have probably been to this region, and when I say this region, the country in the Balkan area, for the last about once a year for the last 10 years, and I've seen a lot of changes in this region, and especially coming after the conflict of the 1990s. And I will just say that I think membership on the part of Montenegro into NATO is essential. It is vital. It is so important. And I think that especially in what we're seeing happening in the world and what we're seeing going on in Russia and other parts of the world, that the membership of Montenegro is essential. And you can count on, I think, many of us in the Congress. As you know, the Congress and the United States government is not controlled by one particular person. We have a president that controls the executive branch. We have the Congress that deals with the legislative branch. And then, of course, we have the judicial side that's controlled by the Supreme Court and the other lower courts. So there's not any one I think, voice that speaks for the United States government as a whole, but I will say there's a lot of support. Now, clearly the judicial side of government will not be involved in this so much because they're interpreting the Constitution, or at least that's what they're supposed to be doing, is from their role on the courts. But I can tell you that from the executive side, I think it's very important that that they understand the importance. I think they're seeing the importance of NATO membership for Montenegro. And number two, I think that Congress is very much in support of it. Now, you know, as I say, there's many different parts of the federal government. There's also many parts of Congress. There are 435 of us that serve in the United States House. There's another 100 that serves in the United States Senate. So you have the sometimes the capability of having 535 different opinions on different ideas. But I think that I can speak for many of my colleagues and say that we do think that stability is important. We know that this region has been pitted with different conflicts and wars throughout the decades and throughout the centuries, and that membership into NATO would be a great first step in making sure that those conflicts are few and far between, if any at all. So you can certainly count on my support in doing what I can from my role, not only in the U.S. House of Representatives, but also on the Defense Subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee, but also in my voice and how I can be of help to this region.
Thank you, Congressman, and we will get back to this after I give the word to former Minister of Defense of Albania, Mr. Mediu, who is now the head of the Republican Party of Albania, also, as I mentioned before, former Minister of Defense and the former Minister of the Environment, if I'm right. Was a member of the Albanian Parliament for 4 consecutive terms and served at various times as the chairman of the Parliamentary Committee on Stability Pact and European Integration. Also a member of the Parliamentary Committees on Foreign Affairs, Security and Legal Issues. Welcome to Montenegro, Mr. Mediu. And since you are coming from a country which recently joined NATO, 2009, what are your experiences? How could you compare a situation in Albania before joining NATO and now, especially in respect to the FDIs? You know, can you give us some very concrete examples, and what would be your message to our citizens, you know, and to our people here in Montenegro in that respect?
Okay, first I will say that NATO is not just a military alliance. It's a family of clear rules, and both Montenegro and Albania are looking to get into EU and getting into NATO, which means meeting the standards to get into EU and into NATO. And I think they are kind of, you know, complementary to one another. So from that perspective, you know, having good stability and democracy in the country, that's the first step to get into NATO. Having good neighboring relationship, that's the good first step to get into NATO. So in that perspective, I think it helps us to be more accountable to our citizens. Second, you know, as a political tool, it helps Albanians to come to the same understanding. Ruling party and the opposition. We worked a long time together. Once was another party in government, the other one, you know, other times were the other parties in government. We worked hand in hand as a national goal to get into the EU and get into NATO. Euro-Atlantic integration for us has been very, very important. And we say that NATO integration after independence of Albania is the greatest achievement for Albanian people. Why we say that? Not just from security perspective, but also from the, you know, other developments in the country. I'll tell you that in foreign investments after we got into NATO, tripled. FDI, you know, went to $4.5 billion, which was a great achievement for Albania at that time. But I will say add something more than that. For example, one of the main investments in Albania right now is TAP, Trans-Adriatic Pipeline, which is very crucial because energy is part of security. And this pipeline is not important just for Albania, but it's important also for Montenegro and other countries in the region. And I will say to you that without being a member of NATO, it would be very difficult that this pipeline would go through Albania, because security of these pipelines is very, very important. So what I will say, once you try to get into NATO, you have less spendings in the sense of building your own without any support, defense system, which is very costly. And so you spend less money to be interoperable with NATO. You need to keep the commitment to spend 2% of GDP, not just playing around saying, till we get to NATO, we keep this 2%, and then we move on, do whatever we want. Second, I think it builds, military operabilities, which serves not just a military purpose, helps a lot in civil emergencies and other cases, which, are of great use for the country. And then when you move to the other side, once you get into NATO, for sure you have all the investors understanding they are going to invest in a safe country. And that's very, very crucial. And I mentioned some of them. We have a lot of investment in hydropowers, with an investment of about $800 million. When one of the main investments, as I mentioned, TAP and other investments that are coming to the country. I hope we are going to be good enough to find out the ways that all this interest about investing in Albania, we can be capable as government to open them the doors and have them investing in Albania. So I think it has benefits in many ways. Benefits to the people because of standards of government, benefits to security, and benefits to the economy.
Thank you, Mr. Mediu. And as a follow-up on this, on your comments regarding FDIs, I will pose a question to Congressman Eween, who actually used to represent Ohio in Congress for 6 terms. And prior his congressional service, he operated a successful Ohio real estate and development firm, as well as serving 3 terms in the Ohio General Assembly as the senior Republican on the Financial Institutions and Insurance Committee. So since you are coming from a business, more or less, and since you are very familiar with that, and as a follow-up on this, what Mr. Mediu said, my question would be, why we don't have some American major investors here in Montenegro? When we can expect to see some American investors here in Montenegro? And are we so small that you don't care about us, or what's the problem,
There is no problem. I think all Americans look forward to the unity that is taking place in the Balkan region. I think Congressman Aderholt said it correctly, in that Americans look forward to participation in NATO. And I think that Fatmir did the perfect explanation. We talk about NATO in general, but sometimes we fail to mention what NATO is. And NATO merely says that we face security concerns, and it is extremely demanding on a government to protect itself in all of the new areas of threat. You take cybersecurity, the necessity for intelligence internationally, naval responsibilities, air responsibilities, ground forces. For a nation to take that on is such a tremendous, tremendous burden that if they could join together and share those responsibilities, it is so much better for the people, in that they would have superior protection at tremendously lower cost, number one. And then, as he said also, that there's the interoperability, the trust and relationships that nations build when they are a part of a team. And so the interoperability of NATO with all of the Balkan region can help establish an area of stability that for which the future of the Balkans will be known, I believe. So as Montenegro becomes a part of that family, I think every investor that ever visits Montenegro or spends times with a Montenegrin understands the benefit that would come from having the security climate and the relationships that would allow for investment. So I see a bright future in that regard.
They might have a little bit problem with double taxation sometimes.
That's always a problem everywhere, right? Congressman Aderholt, there are some speculations, I would say, that it would be in the best interest of some Western countries, to postpone the invitation to Montenegro in order not to offend Russia at this very sensitive time. What's your opinion on that, and is it just a speculation, or maybe there are really something true about it?
Well, from my perspective, I think that it is important that this moves forward very quickly. I don't think that we need to sit around and wait and see if one country or another is offended. I think time is of the essence. I think it's important to move forward. I think most of my colleagues understand that from that perspective as well. You know, Russia and other countries are going to have their own agenda. They're going to do what they're going to do. And I think that it would be a sign of weakness for us to sit around and wait on what some other countries are going to do. And, you know, certainly you want to be diplomatic. You want to be thoughtful in any process that you go through. But I think this is a situation where I think if you look at all the situation and all the pieces that are on the table, I think it's in the interest of as the former Minister of Defense says here, who was, you know, who, let me just say, played a vital role or played the key role in making sure that Albania was part of NATO and their membership, that we move quickly on this and that we as a Congress do what we can to support that. So, you know, it is something that, as the former minister mentioned, is something not only in the interest of security, but also in the economic interest of this country as well. So I'm hopeful that the citizens of this country, the people of Montenegro, see the importance of not only the security standpoint, but also from the economic standpoint of how important NATO membership would be. So from my perspective, answer your question, it is my hope that our administration from the White House, that they would want to move forward on this. I mean, this is something that, as I say, we're a government that is divided in the sense that we don't have one person that controls the entire government. But hopefully this can be something that Congress can encourage, and we can let the administration know that we feel very, very sincerely and we feel very strongly about the moving forward of this membership.
And as a follow-up on this, from your point of view, how would you describe the Balkan region? As a safe area, as a secure area, as a stable region, or it's still unfinished story, you know, in a sense of the security? Can we talk about the security in the Balkan until all the countries basically from this region joins NATO?
Well, I think if I said today that this is, you know, there's no problems here and all the Balkan countries are you know, very stable and there's no problem, I think that would be overlooking the obvious. There's certainly some issues out there that need to be dealt with. There's instability in different regions of the Balkans, and I think that's just a matter of fact. But I do see it moving in the right direction. But that's why I think that NATO membership would be something that would carry the Balkan region over the edge, and the edge of the sense of going to solid ground for security. So while I'm optimistic, as I say, I've been coming here for the last 10 years. I've always felt very safe when I've been in this region. But you know, that's not to say that I understand there's, from time to time, there's situations that pop up. There's still instability with ethnic groups that still are very sensitive. But I think that as time goes on, as we day by day and month by month as we go forward, those times are coming fewer and far between. And therefore, I think that this is becoming a more stable region. I think you'll see more investors. But as I say, I think that the membership into NATO will be one of the things that really takes you to a new level.
Thank you, Congressman. At the same time, if there is anybody from the audience who wants something, just to remind them, who wants to raise a question, just raise your hand in order to see. Please.
We don't have to see NATO just as something that we want to achieve. We have to understand about what we do here. So I don't think that we are immune from some threats, starting from terrorism. So ISIS is becoming a big problem. And we don't have to forget that they have foreign fighters from this region going to Syria. And it's going to be a big problem to analyze where they got the ground to do that, so recruiting and going there. As well, we have to understand when they come back. And terrorism threat is one of the main threats that came out of the Well Summit. And also, I think, are other related issues which have to make us to work together in the sense of understanding our participation in NATO. Security threats are not any longer as they were considered about 3 years ago or 4 years ago, let's say, asymmetric threats. They are very hybrid threats. And in that perspective, I think it's important that we as countries in the Balkans understand our way. Our way is toward EU, and our way is toward Euro-Atlantic relationship, which then we have to think how we can capitalize this in the interest of our citizens, in the interest of security, and other issues which are related with it.
When you mention terrorism, I must definitely mention the recent developments in Macedonia. So, based on your opinion, what happened there? Is that something what a lot of people, especially here, sees as a part of the project called Great Albania, or what's your perception on that?
Will be for me unwise to jump to the conclusions because there are still a lot of investigations going on. I'll say a lot of leadership in the Balkan countries, sometimes they use a kind of language or excuse for domestic problems. They come up with some issues which pump time after time that has nothing to do with the realities in the countries. I don't think it's any idea such of Great Albania. We all have a future into Europe. And Albanians will work together, Montenegrins and Albanians have to work together. If we don't understand that the future that we are looking all together, it's not just the future for Albanians or Montenegrins or Macedonians, but is the future for the Balkans, I don't think we have understood the process. The second part of it is we are small countries, and we are not understanding that the EU integration process, more than political one, is economical one. So we have to find out the ways that we can combine our economic efforts as people, Albanians, Montenegrins, Serbs, Macedonians, Croats, and so on. Question is, what is going to be our role in the future market of EU? Are we just going to please ourselves in saying that we are looking as leaders, politicians to get into the EU, or are going to take further steps to understand what is necessary to do in our Balkan region to combine our efforts, to see how we can develop a good economy, to combine the investments and see, what role we can have in the future. So, in my belief, whoever says from the leadership in Albania or in the other countries, talking about the idea of Great Albania is doing just for the pure political purpose and not for any reality that exists in the minds of the people. But for sure, this creates problems time after time.
That's definitely the case, especially here in this part of the world, Mr. Eween, Mr. Mediu spoke about the costs. He mentioned actually the costs of the membership into NATO. And nowadays we are discussing a lot here in Montenegro about, a number of people simply, thinks that it's in the best interest of Montenegro to be or to become a neutral country. They think it's much cheaper, they think it's much better to stay totally outside of any alliance. What's your opinion on that, especially in respect to the costs?
Well, I understand the interest in that. It sounds good at first blush, but the fact is that every city has to have a police force, or else no one's going to live comfortably in that city. No one's going to invest in that city if crooks can just run through. So there has to be security. The question is, who's going to provide the security? Do you provide it collectively at a lower cost with superior performance, or do you try to go it alone? If you try to go it alone, it's going to be a tremendous responsibility that will require a great deal of taxes, and it will not have the assurance of stability for investment. So by joining together, you lower the cost, you increase the protection, and you encourage investment. So those are the two alternatives, and I can understand how independence sounds good, but as you look down the road, a growing economy covers everything else. And in order to get a growing economy, you need security and stability. And hopefully this can lead in that direction.
Yeah, hopefully.
And if you declare yourself neutral, every country in the world will declare that they're self-neutral, but it doesn't mean they don't, or they are not part of any risks, so
Exactly.
they have to face.
Exactly, especially in cyber.
Yes,
attacks
cyber,
and
as I
things like
mentioned,
that.
terrorism and
Yeah,
so on, are a lot
exactly.
of threats now. It's because we have always in mind when we say neutral, conventional threats.
Yeah.
So which comes from the neighboring countries, so on, which I don't think is the case now.
Let me just add to that. I think it's important to understand when you say, and just like Congressman McEwen said, if you look at it from a first blush, it seems like, you know, being neutral and being out is very attractive. But if you really look at it, get deep down into the situation and really look at it, there are going to be people out there, and there's going to be countries out there that want to take advantage of other countries. And having a stability and having a friendship and having an alliance with other countries that can be in your best interest really only makes sense, because there will be those countries that and those places around the world that will pop up, and even terrorist spots that will pop up and try to take advantage of your country. And you will not be able to sit there in a neutral position, and you'll be taken advantage of. So that's why I think it's so important that membership should be looked at very strongly. There may be a lot of people out there in Montenegro that are unsure about it, that have reservations about it, but I would encourage you to really look at the facts, and I think that they speak very clearly.
Thank you, Congressman. We have a few questions from the audience. The first one, Bulgarian ambassador, please. The microphone here.
First of all, let us use our guesses more as we can. Firstly, we know how important is the American position about the next enlargement of NATO, also the open door policy and the invitation for Montenegro. And secondly, we all know that this is the political and strategical goal for Montenegro, receiving the invitation till the end of this year. As Savo said in the beginning of his statement, there is a lot of rumors in this country about enlargement, next enlargement and invitation for Montenegro. One of them is the statement of the Senator McCain, who said that maybe the decision for the invitation will be taken of the President of the United States after the elections in 2016. Are there any official position on this problem and what we can expect in this field? Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Please start with you.
Well, I'm not aware of any, you know, and certainly this is not something that, being with the State Department, this is not something, and I think there is an official position right now. I think you have different members of Congress, as I mentioned, have different opinions on this issue, as I mentioned earlier. But I think that when most members of Congress see what is going on over here, and have spent some time in this region, that they will come to the conclusion that it's much more important to move quickly on this instead of waiting until the next presidential election occurs and a new president is sworn in.
Mr. Mediu.
Maybe John McCain wants to have a Republican president to sign, Montenegro being to NATO. But it's important you sell your case. So from our experience, what we try to do is trying to have monthly meeting with all ambassadors from NATO countries, trying to explain what we achieved in the membership action plan and also in our defense reform. So try to have a military diplomacy combined with diplomacy, and especially reaching out to important members of the Senate and the House in the United States, because we know they have a strong voice in the position of American administration. And for sure, John McCain is one of the senators that deals a lot with security issues. But still I say that, before thinking what the others will do, it's important that we convince ourselves that we are doing the right thing. And I think that Montenegro is on the right path. Another thing that you have to explain, in my belief, is the importance for the region to get Montenegro into NATO, especially relating with issues of terrorism and what's going on in Macedonia right now. This is going to be the greatest message for Albania, Montenegro, Serbia, and Macedonia. This enlargement is needed. Otherwise, it will become a little bit like European process. too long, a little bit of fatigue, and a lot of,
Not worth it.
questions and issues in place.
Thank you. Another question from the audience, the guy in the middle, please present yourself.
Thank you. My name is Luka Darmanovic. I'm a postgraduate student at the Faculty of Security Studies in Belgrade. First, I would like to thank our distinguished panelists for a very interesting discussion, and to ask both Congressman Aderholt and Mr. Mediu a question concerning Kosovo. Do you think that Kosovo is a fertile ground for spreading of terrorist activities, having in mind that it's the poorest country in Europe with a GDP per capita of only $8,000, I think, in 2014, with an unemployment rate of 30%, and where a third of the population lives below the poverty line? And also, do you think that there are some structures in the Kosovo government that are deliberately closing eyes before the problem of terrorism and tolerating terrorist elements in its territory? Thank you.
Okay, what I will say, I will just take from your perspective of the economy in Kosovo, in the region, which creates always the ground for certain bad things happening. So if you see that, I talked about foreign fighters going to Syria, most of it is because the tendency that started a while ago or changing the Muslim religion in the region from secularist religion to more extremist one. It affected the NGOs that came with different kind of assistance, but the purpose was to change it. So we lost that old tolerance in some parts. Second is a kind of brainwashing system for sure, and the economy plays a very important role. I'm not going to take other examples, but the people that leave Albania, they go with their families there. So living with a family means that you have a future there. You're not going just for religion purpose, but you think you have a better life where you go, which is not shown that is the truth. And some of them wanted to come back. But I think everywhere we have ground for certain elements. And I think especially to terrorism and foreign fighters, they are coming from all the countries. And don't see it from the religion perspective. Don't see it from ethnic groups. This is going to be the biggest mistake ever, in my belief. See it as a problem of each nation, as Balkans, to face it all together. And, I think that's where we have to stand all together and do the best that we can do in order to stop or even to take the security measures, the legislation that is needed in order to face this reality. Otherwise, we are going to fail one by one to do the right thing. So I think that when you talk about the governments, everyone, if you go in Albania, they might say much worse things about, current government in Albania. And in my opposition, so sometimes I feel good about it. But when we talk in general, I think, we have problems of having accountable governments. And when we don't have accountable governments that do the right thing, sometimes, it's always room for developing certain things which harms the security, but harms the life of the people as well.
Well, let me say, certainly Kosovo has had challenges, but I was in Kosovo for the first time probably 10 years ago, and then visited again a couple of years ago, and then was back again last year. And I think I've seen there's been some real changes in that region and in that country. And so I'm optimistic about Kosovo. Like I said, while I know there's challenges there, I think the government leaders there are on the right path. They're trying to do the right thing to try to move that country forward. So, I've had very good relationships with the people there in Kosovo, and I'm very optimistic about them. So while they still have some work to do, as I think all countries, including the United States, we have issues that we need to work through. I'm optimistic, so I'm not ready to write Kosovo off. So I hope the best for them, and want to work with them to make that a part of this region as stable as possible as any other part of this entire Balkan country area.
Thank you. Bob, you want to add something on this?
No, it's
Definitely
fine.
not on this. Okay. Then we have a few questions. So there is, before closing those questions, just something you mentioned before, which is a strong support in the parliament in Albania, Mr. Mediu. You said that there was basically... Oh, sorry. You mentioned before that there was a strong support in Albania, especially in the parliament, and that all parties, or almost all, supported NATO, and that they understood that as a national goal, which is definitely not the case here in Montenegro. And probably we are the only country, where people in the parliament, where all the parties in the parliament actually don't see NATO membership as a national goal. So how to, I wouldn't say convince, but what would be your message, to the leaders of those parties which are not supporting NATO, to get a picture of that in a broader sense as a national goal of this country, which is in the best interest of all of us.
Include everybody. Make them understand the process and the importance of the process. This is very important. I think it's important that members of parliament not just talk, but understand the process. The government, especially the Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Foreign Affairs, needs to create more space for them to participate on the decision-making, on the analysis of, membership action plan and PARP. This is the way that they understand the process. Personally, I will tell you, everywhere I visited, NATO countries or NATO headquarters in Brussels, I had with me always 2 members of the opposition. That made them, really being part of the process and understanding the process better. And I think what the difference you have here are much more emotional. There are real, issues in place. And in order to avoid the emotions, I think it comes with the somehow understanding the process. And that's the crucial, the government has to include the parliament in the process, to understand membership action plan, to talk with them in Security Committee, Foreign Relations Committee. I don't know how it's organized, the Montenegrin Parliament, but once they get to understand, once they face the reality with their colleagues in the government, and they talk with the ministers and also with the NATO leaders, I think for sure things will change. It's more about politics, we know. When you have, a support of population, 1/3 yes, 1/3 not in favor, and the other part now, being absence, there's always room for gaining more political support. But in that sense, if you work all together and you increase the population support, more politicians will get involved and say yes to this process. And especially let them know about what we talked before. This is in benefit not just from security perspective, but the economy of Montenegro. The economy of the families of Montenegro will be much better if you really will know how to capitalize that. And I'm not saying that we did the best one to capitalize, that success in Albania.
Thank you. At the back.
Let me add just one
please.
thing, if
Please.
I may. There's only 2 reasons that people run for office or take political power. One is to be there. They want to be mayor, or they want to be governor, or they want to be president. The other is to do something. And in order to do something, it takes leadership. And that means that you need to point the way and explain why a particular action is necessary. Now, NATO is going to be fine without Montenegro. And so therefore, it's not like they have something that they have to sell. But Montenegro can save a lot of money, can be much more secure, and can be much more inviting to investment if it has the collective security of people who like it in Europe and are willing to share their expertise and talent with it. That when they see a breach of cybersecurity, they immediately would relate to the Montenegrin defense. So it's a responsibility of the leaders in the parliament to say to the people, we believe it is in the best interest of our nation long-term to do something. If they're willing to do that, I think that would be beneficial to an invitation from NATO. If they don't, then we'll proceed down the road a few more years.
As a former U.S. ambassador to Montenegro once said, NATO will not collapse without Montenegro, definitely. The question from the back.
Good evening. My name is Lazar Vujošević. I'm a member of Democratic Party of Socialists. I have a question for all of you guests here today. If we see some terrorist actions here in Montenegro, like we saw in Macedonia, how much support can we accept from the United States and Albania? Because, like Mr. Kentera said about the opposition of Montenegro, they are against NATO, and they are still pro-Serbian activists and pro-Russian. So that destabilization can, those terrorist acts or destabilization of Montenegro can implicate also of changing the ruling party of Montenegro. And we can see not Montenegro who is going to NATO, but Montenegro who is going to Russia. Thank you.
Who's going to start?
You always let me start with the difficult questions. But, you know,
Yeah,
I will
yeah,
say this, that still about what happened in Macedonia, I will not jump to the conclusion, because it's too early to jump to the conclusions. I think it's government problem as it is, you know, some of issues related to the Ohrid agreement. And some of the other issues, you know, which maybe later on, according some of the intelligence, will come up on, and, you know, we'll know more about it. About Montenegro, I think for sure you have a neighbor that stands with you and works with you. And I'm here not just, you know, personally, but also as a member of parliament to say it's in benefit of Albania that Montenegro gets into the EU, and it's benefit of Albania also Montenegro gets into NATO. When you have a stable neighbor, you are stable in your own home as well. So we say friend in need are friend indeed, and that's what we always have with Montenegro, and especially because we have Albanians living in Montenegro, so we have a connection here. That's the most also important. And I say that the most important in order to fight any terrorist threat is the exchange of intelligence, to know things before they happen, to take the measures before things happen. That's why we need, and I will appreciate if the government of Montenegro in this situation can take a lead to combine the intelligence effort in the region against terrorist threats related to ISIS or other, you know, security threats, you know, which are present in the region. It's very important. As for Russia, that's a decision of Montenegro. Russia and the Russian economy and Russian politics is, you know, one of the main discussions right now. But as you are moving toward the EU, and you want to become EU countries are NATO countries, so they have a defense policy, which is NATO defense policy, European defense policy, and I don't think that Montenegro getting into EU wants to have a different, you know, defense policy. You know, it is combined, it's a complementary. I think it works together.
Thank you. Bob, you want to add something?
That was the right answer.
Congressman?
Well, let me just agree also with former Minister Mediu, and just say that, you know, we can't speculate about Macedonia, you know, from the United States. I certainly cannot speak with any authority of what the situation over there is as investigations continue. But one thing that I know for sure, that as we have more and more security in the region, you'll have less and less terrorism that'll pop up, and having that security with NATO will, I think, will decrease the chances of terrorism popping up in other parts of the Balkans. So I'm you know, think it's vitally important that as mentioned here earlier, and I think as Congressman McEwen says, that the government leaders here must communicate this to the people of this region. This is something that has to be communicated, and that is in the best interest of Montenegro to move forward with NATO membership. That it's not something that you know, the United States is pushing for, or necessarily that NATO is pushing for, but to see it from the best interest of Montenegrins.
And just, it is a very good question, however, and the one sentence answer is, how much support can they count on? And the support would be greater in NATO than without.
And just regarding to Serbia, you know, when I was the Minister of Defense, I had a lot of discussions and issues even in the press when I invited the Minister of Defense of Serbia to come to Albania. And also, especially when I had the Chief of Defense of the Serbian Armed Forces to come to Albania. But we worked perfectly together in A3 plus other Balkan countries, and now they are part of a lot of activities on this framework. And I think it's important that also we see this relationship with Serbia for the future. And I can tell you that I met with the ministers, they were looking to get into NATO, which will take a bit longer because of issues which are in place. But I think also the Serbian future is into NATO and into EU, no doubt.
Thank you. We have time for two very brief questions. Lady at the back, and I will kindly ask you for brief answers.
Good luck.
My name is Milica Minic. I'm a journalist of Atlas Television. In terms of potential Montenegrin membership in NATO, it is inevitable to mention public support, which varies between 30 and 35%. Different polls show different results depending on the organization which is conducting it. I would like to ask you, could the invitation to Montenegro eventually depend on the fact that majority of Montenegrins still oppose to membership in NATO? It is one question. And the other one, this is a question for our guest from the United States. Do you believe that something would change in terms of public support if the alliance would apologize to families of the victims of bombing in 1999? And do you, as an American, understand why Montenegrins strongly oppose this membership? Thank you.
Wow, that's a good question, and I don't know that I'm qualified to answer it as an American, but I will say that certainly I understand the sensitivity of Montenegrins, and certainly I think the wounds are still there, and that you can't overlook that. So to pretend that those are not there, I think would be very callous on the part of any country, and certainly as an American to look back and to brush that off is of no significance. So certainly the wounds are there, and certainly you have to recognize that. But I do think that, and really I can't speak to the, as far as an apology, would that be satisfactory for the Montenegrin people? I can only speculate, and I would think that certainly, you know, if I could put myself in that place to say that certainly would. If anytime anybody apologizes to you for something, it counts for something, and how much it will count here in Montenegro is hard for me to say as an American. The other thing that I will say, though, is that I think it is important for NATO membership, as you mentioned earlier, that if the people here are united, and you will never have 100%. You won't get 100% in the United States. You'll not, in my home state of Alabama, you'll not get 100% on anything. And I understand here in Montenegro, you would not get 100% on anything, and certainly not NATO membership. But I think it is important for the NATO membership moving forward in the direction of a membership being offered. I think it goes a long way in the sense that if the Montenegrin people are in some unity, and the majority of the people here in Montenegro feel that it's important to move forward in that direction. And he said to keep answers brief, so I'll stop there.
Thank you.
For me, the popular support is very important. It's important that 2% of the GDP spending for defense to increase the operational capabilities and maintaining this to meet, to meet the interoperability with NATO. But the popular support, the importance to explain to the people about the future. In the Balkans, we are used to talk about the past a lot and point the finger to one another. And what we have lost, in my belief, a lot of common things as values, as history that we have developed together. And I think, emotions might be right in this case, but the most important thing is, the leaders and the people to look what they can do for the future is very, very important. Otherwise, we are going to lose ourselves in the emotions as we do sometimes without looking to the future.
Thank you. The guy in the middle.
Hello, my name is Mark Lukajlović, journalist from Prva TV. I have a question for Congressman. We hear the support from Congress, but still there is no concrete support from the White House. So my question for you is, what needs to be done for us to get that support, and when can we expect the green light from the White House? Thank you.
Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, this, we have a divided government, and certainly I cannot speak for the White House, but, they have seemed to be kicked the can down the road, so to speak, a little further. But you know, I think as you make your case and as you speak to the elected officials in this region, I think making that very clear that you want to move forward, I think goes a long way in letting the officials in the administration know that it is important. So, but I think that you would see a great favorability among members of Congress in this area, and I think more members of Congress that visit this area and find out about what is going on in the region will be very supportive of it. You want to add anything, Fatmir?
I just want to add this, you know, Well Summit gave a clear message to Montenegro, which is very positive. Second, I think will be good for Obama to leave the office having Montenegro member of NATO.
Thank you. And the last question from the audience today.
Thank you very much. My name is Vladimir from the Atlantic Council of Montenegro. Also, I'm American University alumnus and a PhD candidate at the University of Vienna. My question regards the European Union and the recent attitudes of the Foreign Minister of Germany and President Juncker, who voiced that the European Union army is a prospect for the future. What is your take on that issue, and is it a necessary duplication of efforts when we know that NATO still exists? Thank you very much.
Well, you know, again, I'm not, from an American's perspective, it's hard for me to comment on that, but I would say that from what I know and the information that I have, I think that the route of NATO is much more important. I think that's the way that should be concentration. I think it would be a duplicative effort. I would be more in favor of going down the route of from NATO perspective as opposed to some kind of military of the EU. And you know, certainly this is something that I don't think a lot of Americans have really talked about and discussed from a real serious perspective. Your average American out there is not really, you know, because this is something that's really involves Europe. But from my perspective, I think that NATO is doing a very good job, and I think that's where we need to really put our efforts in at this point.
Yeah. I would add that that's a legitimate question when you study history over time. I've visited over 100 countries and served on the Intelligence Committee for many years, and I would say this: there is no greater misunderstanding of Americans than the idea that they wish to be involved in other countries. The natural tendency of Americans overwhelmingly is isolationism. And when 1 million people are being slaughtered in Rwanda, everyone says, why doesn't America do something? And America says, why doesn't the rest of the world do something? And when people are being slaughtered in Kosovo, or when people are being decapitated in Syria, everyone turns to the Americans and say, why don't you do something? The strong, overwhelming desire of Americans, when I say Americans, I mean constituents, not diplomats, not presidents. I'm talking about people who go to work in the morning, are farmers, and live in Middle America. They have no interest in sending boys year after year, decade after decade to solve problem after problem. So, if anyone understands the history of Germany, it might be in their desire to have an independent military. And if anybody understands the interests of America, it would be their desire to be isolationists. Those are two very strong tendencies that over time exist. And in this discussion, I would just keep that historical perspective in mind.
I will tell you a story that happened in Verkunda in 2007 in Security Conference of Verkunda. Then the Minister of Defense of France, Michel Alliot-Marie, well-known, you know, Minister of Defense, stood up and speaking about Euro-Atlantic relations, said, you know, that Americans have to combine better with European friends on decision-making. And then a French guy, you know, well-known as well, Pierre Lelouch, stood up and said, she said, we need to function like an orchestra. And so Pierre Lelouch stood up and said, you know, in order to have an orchestra, you need the conductor. You need also the, you know, the things to play music. And in order to have this, you need money to put in order, you know, to have all these things together. So the most important thing is that each country that is part of NATO does what is needed for NATO. Well, summit came out clearly that all NATO countries have to spend on defense, not just waiting that America will do its part. And I think this is related to some of security issues, some of the issues coming out of Security Conference in Munich about the role of Germany. Because the role of Germany in most of the operations of NATO is very passive. And I think with the leadership that Germany has in Europe needs to be more involved, and that's my idea. I think this is the right idea, that Germany takes more proactive role in NATO in military actions. And for sure the discussion about EU organizing a kind of defense policy and defense military has been going on for a long time. But to do that, you need to spend money. To do that, you need to build operation capability, or it will be just talkings. And unfortunately, so far, it's just talkings because there's no operation capability in place. Even Britain, that was too good on spending in defense, is not at that point anymore. Just Poland and Estonia reached to more than 2%. The rest of the countries not, which is a kind of problem for NATO operation capabilities.
Thank you, Mr. Mediu. And just before we finish, and instead of my conclusion, I would kindly ask you 30 seconds maximum for your final messages, in respect to our citizens, how to overcome the emotions, how to understand the situation, and what's in the best interest of this country and their future.
Well, again, let me say it's great to be back in Montenegro. It's a beautiful country, and anytime I get a chance to be invited to this region, to come and see your country and to see this, the Balkan area, it's always an honor for me to do that. Let me just say, I think that the citizens of Montenegro just have to look at the facts. But I do think that sincerely and certainly from a perspective of not trying to be an American that's trying to tell another country what to do, is just to look at the facts. I think that it's very important that you see the positive aspects of NATO membership, because, as has been mentioned here today time and time again, not only helps from a economic standpoint, but certainly from a security standpoint. It is something that is more economical for your military when you can pull together as a team. And so without trying to tell any country what they need to do, they need to look at the facts, see what's there, and we hope the right decision will be made.
Thank you, Mr. Mediu.
I'll say just this: stand up and sell out your case and be a member of NATO.
I would say, from my analysis of history and spending time with Mr. Kushma as he was declaring independence in Zagreb and all of the activities of history, I believe that the Balkanization, the term in the dictionary, is going to be the most positive it's ever been throughout history as we look forward to the next 25 to 30 years. The opportunities here are better than it's been in 10 lifetimes.
Thank you so much for this very constructive, open discussion, and for being with us today. And we are looking forward to host you again here in Montenegro. Thank you all for also being patient and being here with us and for posing all these questions. And with this, I would like to close this session and this panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.